The transfer portal has been open for 7 full days, and Notre Dame still has not landed a single commitment. Fans have plenty of questions, and we have some answers on today's Friday Mailbag. That's coming up next.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up? Welcome in. This is Locked On Irish, your daily home for Notre Dame football. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, which is now the #1 sports podcast network, all thanks to your support. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I graduated from Notre Dame. Now I'm a producer at Fox Sports, and I've been covering the Irish since 2020. It is Friday, January 9th, so happy Friday, everybody. And I appreciate you for making this your first watch or listen of the day. If you're new here, please subscribe to the YouTube channel or follow along on your preferred podcast platform. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The college football playoff is here, and FanDuel is the best place to get into the action all playoff long. So visit FanDuel.com to get your college football playoff profit boosts every game day. All right, so I just got done watching Miami knock off Ole Miss in the college football playoff semifinal game, and now Miami has a home game in the national championship. If you had told me in the season opener for Notre Dame this season that one of those teams would be playing the national championship, hell, I would have booked my flight and hotels right then and there. But unfortunately, it is Miami who is in the national championship. And honestly, it just kind of makes sense for the way things have been going for Notre Dame, because it feels like 2025 was just a cursed season for the Irish, the way it started and the way it ended. And this past offseason hasn't really been a lot of fun either, at least in the first month. And we have got a loaded Friday mailbag on tap asking all kinds of questions about the offseason and more specifically the transfer portal. So we're going to dive headfirst into the transfer portal discourse. We've been doing it all week, and we're going to continue to do it because it's really important. And fans have questions about how important it really is, what Notre Dame has historically done well in the portal, and why this current stretch has been different. Then we're going to get into some specific roster questions, including the puzzle on the defensive line and what Notre Dame really needs at wide receiver. They appear to be really close to getting a commitment there, which could lead to more questions about the room, but it would be an influx of talent, so at least that's good. And finally, we're going to address the questions about Marcus Freeman's future, the NFL rumors, the messaging about his intentions to stay at Notre Dame, and if the struggles going on in the transfer portal have anything to do with Marcus Freeman's future at Notre Dame. So we have a lot to get into today. Let's get to our first question here. It's actually 2 questions that are basically asking the same thing. At Bradley Mestach 7648, is the pressure on the portal driven by real roster needs or outside noise from modern day college football? And then at Griff Wisen asks, how much does the portal really matter for Notre Dame? Freeman has been great at improving recruiting, which is obviously where it all starts. And then Griff says, I also haven't seen a lot of other major programs making any huge splashes. It's not just ND missing on transfers. Well, I would reject Griff's premise that major programs aren't making huge splashes, because Indiana, whether we like to admit it or not, is the favorite to win the national championship, and they have made a huge splash in the portal already. But if your point is the Blue Bloods haven't really made a big splash, I'll give you that. But the transfer portal is extremely important in college football, even for programs that primarily build their rosters through high school recruiting, like a Notre Dame and like at Ohio State. Just look at the 4 teams that made the college football playoff semifinals. This stat comes from Sam Kahn Jr. of The Athletic. Only one team, Oregon, had a higher percentage of games started by players that they recruited, 57%, than by transfers, 43%. So the other 3 teams, Miami, Indiana, and Ole Miss, had more than half of their 2025 games started by transfer players. And all 4 teams starting quarterbacks were transfers. Ole Miss led the way, 65.9%, followed closely by Indiana at 64.9%, then Miami at 53.7%, and Oregon at 43%. So point is, a lot of these teams are starting transfer players. Ole Miss and Indiana aren't really surprising. Like, Lane Kiffin has openly referred to himself as the portal king, or at least he did when he was still the head coach at Ole Miss. And we've also seen Curt Cignetti completely revamp Indiana's roster through the transfer portal. But Oregon and Miami are a little bit more surprising because they also recruit extremely well at the high school level. Oregon has signed top 5 recruiting classes in 3 of the last 4 cycles, although they typically take around 20 players per class, which I think tells you a little bit there because Notre Dame just took 29. So Oregon is signing top classes. They're just not signing quite as many players out of high school. But they had the third highest rated recruiting class in 2026 on the 24/7 Sports Composite, which is actually one spot ahead of Notre Dame. And in 2025, Oregon finished with the fifth ranked class and Miami ranked 14th. But then in 2024, these guys would be juniors now. Both Oregon and Miami signed top 5 high school recruiting classes. Those schools, Oregon and Miami, have figured out how to recruit and develop in-house and then use the portal to enhance their rosters. Notre Dame under Marcus Freeman has done a really good job of that as well, up until this year, which is why it's all so confusing. They landed the most coveted quarterback in the portal ahead of the 2023 season in Sam Hartman. They also found a true diamond in the rough in that class in Javonte Jean-Baptiste. And then in 2024, Notre Dame added 8 transfers, including Riley Leonard, another high-profile quarterback that a bunch of other teams were interested in. And then Notre Dame beat Georgia in the college football playoff in large part because of the transfers. Remember all the big moments that transfers had in that game? Riley Leonard with his legs, R.J. Oben with the strip sack fumble, Bo Collins had a touchdown, Rod Hurd had a huge stop on 4th down, Jaden Harrison had the kickoff return for a touchdown, Mitch Jeter hit a couple big-time field goals. Like, Notre Dame does not win that game without the help of the players that they added in the transfer portal. And Notre Dame is never going to build its roster through the transfer portal, but they have historically used it extremely well to enhance the roster and fill positions of need, which is why this current stretch, again, just feels so puzzling. So yes, recruiting and development matter enormously, but in today's college football landscape, I don't care who you are. Every program has to win in the transfer portal to elevate its roster. Winning might be different for different teams, right? Because winning for Texas Tech involves adding 25 different players. For Notre Dame, it's 8. But you still have to execute your plan, and so far, Notre Dame has not been able to do that. Another reason why it's important actually leads me to this next question. At Kenneth Jackowitz, could the Irish still compete for the championship in 2026 if they don't sign any portal players of need? No. I don't think so. If Notre Dame doesn't add a single player in the transfer portal, they're still good enough to go 11-1 in the regular season with how bad the schedule is. That'll get them into the playoff, right? And look, they're going to be a really good team. They're going to bring back around 15 starters next season. They've got C.J. Carr coming back. They've got some pieces on the offensive line, Jordan Faison. Then on defense, Leonard Moore, Drake Bowen, Adon Schuler, Tay Johnson, all of that. So they have a ton of talent coming back. They should be able to make the playoff, even if they don't add anything in the transfer portal. But then once they're actually in the playoff, I don't think they would go very far. You can't be as thin as Notre Dame is at defensive tackle and win a national championship. That's just not how it works. I'm also not sure they have good enough skill guys today to consistently beat the best defenses in college football. That's why they need to go out there and get a big-time wide receiver. And you're also probably not winning a national championship with Eric Schmidt as your kicker either. Again, they don't need a lot in the transfer portal, but they do have needs. If they strike out on those needs, it lowers their ceiling. That's the reality. They would still be a good team, but just not a great team capable of winning a national championship. But that said, there's still time to land those types of players. All right, next up, Phil Mertz. What is the main cause for Notre Dame's lack of commitments? Is it that Notre Dame is not willing to overpay? Is it the new GM who doesn't have a strong understanding of the portal, or is it something else? And then Patrick Hennessy, 8022, asks, could the amount of money spent on the incoming freshmen combined with the amount of money spent to retain current players be a major factor as to why Notre Dame has not officially signed anyone out of the portal? So people are asking questions. What's the problem here? Why haven't they done it? Is it a money thing? Is it the staff? There's a bunch of different reasons, okay? I believe they missed on 2 of their top targets, wide receiver Nick Marsh from Michigan State and cornerback John Tez Williams from Iowa State, largely because of poor planning. Notre Dame's decision to not host any portal visits until the 4th day of the window was malpractice. That should not have happened. You should not have had your first visit on Monday when the portal opened on Friday. And I have heard a couple of different explanations for why that happened. Some people have suggested that the people on the Notre Dame staff were advised that they weren't allowed to host visits until Monday, but I just find that hard to believe. Like, how can an entire organization get that wrong? Like, that is beyond me. So I think it ultimately comes down to poor planning across the board. Maybe they were a little bit too confident with Marsh and Williams, thinking that, oh, we can wait till Monday. Once they get on campus, they'll sign. It doesn't matter that they're going to take another visit before that. Maybe they applied the same approach to how they use in like high school recruiting, right? Because in high school recruiting, you want to get the last visit. But in transfer portal recruiting, you want to get the first visit. So maybe that was their logic. I don't really know. But whatever reason they chose to have those visits scheduled later in the week, it obviously didn't work. But then there's other reasons as well. For a guy like Xavier Gilliam, the defensive tackle from Penn State, who we talked about a lot on the show this week, he is committed to Tennessee. And academics were a big factor in his decision, according to Matt Freeman from Irish Sports Daily. So Matt said that everything went well for Gilliam in his visit at Notre Dame, but he was concerned about whether he could handle Notre Dame's academic demands, and he ultimately chose to follow his defensive coordinator, Jim Knowles, to Tennessee. It was not a money thing. It was not a scheme thing. And Matt Freeman also mentioned that he had heard multiple transfers who visited campus were, quote, shocked that Notre Dame does not offer online classes. So that doesn't have anything to do with NIL or poor planning by the staff. It's just the fact that, look, Notre Dame is what it is, and they're not going to budge on that, nor should they. Notre Dame is not going to completely sell their soul or abandon who they are. They might allow some kids in who otherwise wouldn't get into the school because they're student athletes, but they're not going to just start doing online classes for transfers. But it's important, now that we hear things like this, for all of us to keep in mind when Notre Dame is pursuing undergraduate transfers. Like, for years, we just sort of assumed that the main issue was Notre Dame was not letting those players in because it's too hard for undergraduate transfers to get into Notre Dame based on their policy with the first-year studies program and all that, which used to be true. But now, even though that Notre Dame is a little bit more open to taking on undergraduate transfers, the players also have to accept the challenge that comes with being an undergraduate student at Notre Dame. Like, if you spent your first 2 years of college just kind of cruising through online classes and then suddenly you're considering Notre Dame where you actually have to attend class in person and pass, that adjustment might not be super appealing. It's also another strong argument for Notre Dame to prioritize graduate transfers, where the process to get them in is a lot easier. But not only that, the academic workload is typically far less intense than it is for undergraduate student athletes, because you can be a non-degree seeking student like Sam Hartman and a lot of the other grad transfers. Like, they had to take a couple classes, yeah, but they were not that difficult for them. So that leads into the high school recruiting and player retention piece. Notre Dame obviously spends the vast majority of its budget on retaining its best players and on high school recruiting. They didn't get a top 5 recruiting class for free, and we're seeing why. They do a great job of landing talent at the high school level and developing it. CJ Carr was built in-house. Leonard Moore, in-house kid. Tay Johnson, Adon Schuler. Like, those players accepted the challenges that come with Notre Dame long ago when they were in high school. So it makes sense to prioritize them, and keeping those guys like a Carr, like a Leonard Moore, like a Adon Schuler, Tay Johnson, Drake Bowen, Kingston Viliamoasa, Jordan Faison. Keeping all of those guys was not cheap, and they're absolutely crucial to the team's success next season. So yes, there are a bunch of different factors that have led Notre Dame to this position, but they still should have been more prepared and had a better plan in place, especially considering they opted out of a bowl game. They had a whole month to prepare for this, and we have seen Notre Dame execute extremely well in the portal under past regimes. Now, granted, it was with Chad Bowden instead of Mike Martin, and I like Mike Martin. He's a big reason why they had a top 5 recruiting class, but so far, it has not been going well for this team in the transfer portal, and that is what makes this entire week so frustrating and so confusing. All right, so now that we've established why the portal matters and why not all panic is created equal, let's get into the specifics, because this roster does have real needs that can't be ignored, but they might have some of them getting filled pretty soon. That's coming up next on Locked On Irish. Thank you for making Locked On Irish your first watch or listen of the day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you have not already, make sure you check out our new Everydayer Club. You'll get access to an ad-free audio feed for Locked On Irish. Same show, same schedule, just no ads, and it works on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever podcast app you use. If you listen every day, it's a really easy upgrade. Go to lockedonirish.supercast.com or tap the link in the show notes to learn more. Today's episode is brought to you by Rugiet. Let's talk about something most men don't bring up, but absolutely should. Stress from work, money, life, it doesn't just switch off at night. And when it shows up at the worst possible time, Rugiet Ready is designed to help you take back control. Rugiet Ready is a next-generation prescription treatment created to support both the brain and the body so you can feel present, confident, and ready when the moment matters. Rugiet Ready combines 3 clinically proven ingredients in 1 mint that dissolves under your tongue so it absorbs fast. You connect with a board-certified doctor online, and everything ships discreetly to your door. It's easy to understand why over 150,000 men have already made the switch. Most men are ready in about 15 minutes on average, so you can stay present, confident, and in control when the moment is right. If you've been thinking about taking the next step, now is the time. Head to Rugiet.com/LockedOnCollege. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnCollege to get 15% off your order for a limited time. Rugiet Ready. Feel present, feel confident, and feel ready. All right, we're back with another Friday Mailbag here on Locked On Irish. And our next question comes from @Ryan_Toussaint. Is now the time we could see Bryce Young slide over to defensive tackle like his dad, especially if Notre Dame lands Keon Keeley? First of all, I just want to say this. Respect to Ryan for his continued support of the show and his dedication to this question, because I see Ryan's name pop up a lot when I'm pulling mailbag questions, and I appreciate the support. I also know that you have asked this specific question multiple times in the past. I remember talking about potentially moving Bryce Young to defensive tackle before the start of this last season, but given the circumstances, it is worth answering again. So let's do it. For any Irish fans looking for good news, I feel very confident that Keon Keeley is going to end up with Notre Dame. Steve Wiltfong, Pete Nakos, and several other insiders have all put in crystal balls for Keeley to commit to Notre Dame. And you know what that usually means. It's already done. Once it's officially official, we're going to do a deep dive on that because it really is a remarkable story. But for this question specifically, and we're going to assume Keon Keeley is on the team, I would still prefer Bryce Young to stay at strong side end. I think the combination of Bryce Young and Boubacar Traore on the outside could absolutely terrorize opposing offenses, especially if Young takes a leap next season, which I think most of us think he will. Plus, they don't have great depth at end either, even if Keon Keeley were on the team. Like after Young and Traore, who are the backups? I think Keon Keeley would be there, and then Logan Thomas, hopefully, and then the two incoming freshmen, Rodney Dunham and Ebenezer Iwatade. Like I like their potential a lot, but it's a lot to ask them to be ready to contribute from day one on the edges. That's why I was really hopeful Notre Dame could steal John Henry Daly away from his old coach, but he announced on Thursday that he's going to follow Kyle Whittingham to Michigan. It's disappointing, but not surprising. John Henry Daly is the transfer out of Utah who put up huge numbers this past season for the Utes, but I was never completely sold on his injury timeline either. He allegedly ruptured his Achilles in late November. He said he was going to be back in mid-May, but either way, he would have been a nice addition to the room, no doubt, especially with 2 years of eligibility left, but he's going to follow Kyle Whittingham to Michigan. So I would probably feel more comfortable moving Keon Keeley to 3 technique so you can get him on the field at the same time as Traore and Young. And then you have Young and Traore at their natural positions. And then, Keon Keeley is a guy who's moved around a lot. It's been difficult for him to find a home, not just like in terms of his living situation at Alabama, but just a general comfort level on and off the football field. So if they take Keeley, and he's huge now. He's much bigger than he was in high school, so he could play the 3 technique. If they train him all offseason at that position, he gets work under Charlie Partridge, I think that could work. And they need help more at defensive tackle. But this whole discussion just reinforces the need to add at least 2 defensive tackles, so you don't have to force Keon Keeley to move to another position, but you can also afford to be flexible with Keeley and Young, especially in third down situations, and then you can maximize the defensive line. They don't even need to be high-profile defensive tackles. Like Jared Dawson and Elijah Hughes certainly were not high-profile picks last year, but they were still extremely important to the team. And we're at a point now where the idea of Armel Mukam returning Notre Dame after he entered the portal is exciting. On 3, Steve Wiltfong actually reported that both sides are open to a return, but Mukam is still taking visits. We'll see what happens there. And then obviously there's the Jason Onye situation. Notre Dame is trying to get him another year of eligibility. Will it get approved with the NCAA? Who knows? But you can't count on that happening. If it happens, great, because Notre Dame desperately needs the help of defensive tackle. But like I said, you can't count on that right now, and you're not going to get an answer about Onye anytime soon. So would any of these things solve the problem at defensive tackle? Would moving Bryce Young inside or Keon Keeley inside or getting Armel Mukam or getting Jason Onye back, would they solve the problems at defensive tackle? No. You need to get 2 defensive tackles in the portal who can actually contribute next season. Just give Charlie Partridge something to work with and let him cook. But we'll see. Like I said, they have another week. All right, this next question is not about the defensive line, so that's good, at least. At ND Today, how would Mylan Graham, the former Ohio State wide receiver, fit this year's team, or is he an ad for the future? I think Graham would start on day one. I really do. That might sound like a stretch because he's barely played through 2 years at Ohio State, but I think he is special, man. He had 6 receptions for 93 yards this past season, which is obviously nothing to write home about. But look at who he was playing behind. 2 first-rounders in Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate, plus Brandon Inniss, who's the number 3 wide receiver, and he was the number 1 overall wide receiver prospect in his class a few years ago, and he's a veteran. He's a really good player. He's just overshadowed by Tate and Smith. And Ohio State didn't rotate that much at wide receiver, and why would you? Brandon Inniss was 3rd among their receivers in snaps this past season with 444. Mylan Graham was 4th with 161. He just didn't really have that many opportunities, but I can tell you that Ohio State fans were very upset to see him leave. They're really excited about his potential as like the next Carnell Tate because he flashed in spring games, and many thought he could be like Carnell Tate. He was a 5-star receiver coming out of high school, and he is extremely fast. It wouldn't be the first time a wide receiver sat behind a couple of first-rounders at Ohio State and transferred elsewhere and became a star. Just look at Jameson Williams. Williams had 15 total catches in his first 2 years at Ohio State. Then he transferred to Alabama, and he exploded for 79 catches, over 1,500 receiving yards, and 15 touchdowns. Then he was drafted in the first round of the NFL draft. Am I saying that Mylan Graham is the next Jameson Williams? No. But I'm also not saying he could be. Outside of Jordan Faison, I don't think there's anyone in the wide receiver room with Graham's athletic ability. Plus, he just spent 2 seasons developing under Brian Hartline, who is the best receivers coach in college football. We got another question about the wide receivers, though. At Elo Himti, if the Irish don't land a portal receiver, who from the current roster will have to step up? Cam Williams, Micah Gilbert, or Elijah Burris? This is a really good question. And for the sake of this discussion, let's assume Graham does end up at Notre Dame. I know he took a visit to Auburn after South Bend, but I feel very confident that Mylan Graham is going to end up with the Irish. He just hasn't committed publicly as of this recording. If that happens, all right, your 3 best receivers would be Jordan Faison, Mylan Graham, and Jane Greathouse. Greathouse is your slot guy. Faison was really good at the field position this past season, but Graham also plays field, and you're not going to want to take either one of those guys off the field. So what do you do if you're Notre Dame? I think they might abandon the traditional boundary role and move those 3 guys all over the formation to create mismatches. We know how much Mike Denbrock loves motioning players pre-snap, and I think you can create a lot of exotic looks with those 3 wide receivers. They're not quite as tall as you want. Like, you don't have a 6'5" guy like Malachi Fields, but you still have 3 guys who can move, and then you could try to put them in advantageous situations going up against the defense. But still, you would love to have a big body wide receiver who can win contested catches, be an asset in the red zone, and in critical 3rd down situations against man coverage. So I really thought that this past year could have been a big breakout year for Micah Gilbert, but he just couldn't stay healthy, dating all the way back to spring practice when he got hurt on literally day 1. But he did score a touchdown in the season opener, which feels like an eternity ago. Then he hurt his hand not long after that and then just couldn't get back on the field because of Malachi Fields. So if things finally come together for Micah Gilbert, I think he could be a productive boundary receiver, even though he would technically be like the 4th option. But I still think he has a bright future at Notre Dame, and I would love to see Cam Williams get closer to the potential that he had as a recruit. But I'm just going to believe it when I see it. And then you've got Burris, who's probably a year away, but he could still be a valuable rotation guy, but he plays field too, so he would be behind Faison and Graham. But I still think he has a lot of potential. If he's just willing to wait around a year, things could be really good for Elijah Burris in the future. So really, it just comes down to Gilbert or Williams. If either one of those guys takes a big step forward as a junior, that would be massive for this wide receiver room. Okay, Adam Mullen asks, will Notre Dame be forced to wait and take lesser quality transfers or just carry fewer players on the roster if this continues? I think it's a little early to say that. I know we're basically halfway through this portal window. After Monday, if Notre Dame still has not made any real headway in the portal, then they're going to be seriously desperate down the stretch here. The portal closes next Saturday, which leaves them a little over a week to convince players who aren't currently in the portal to enter and come to Notre Dame, which is certainly a route that they can choose. It has happened before with many other teams. That's not a good position to be in, but they might not have a choice. And if it's Wednesday of next week and they still haven't landed many impact guys, that's when you're probably just going to have to settle. As of now, there are over 4,000 players in the transfer portal. That's insane to me. You have to believe you can find 8 players in that group who can help Notre Dame next season. You're not going to find the big-time stars, more likely than not. But I just watched Trinidad Chambliss play quarterback in the college football playoff semifinals and played really well in that game. So there is talent everywhere. You just have to identify it, then convince those players to come to Notre Dame. That's what this staff has to figure out over the next week. All right, we've talked personnel, roster construction, and portal strategy, but a lot of this conversation keeps circling back to one name, and that's Marcus Freeman. Does Freeman's uncertain future have anything to do with the lack of portal success? That's next. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The college football playoff is here, and FanDuel is giving all customers even more ways to get in on the action every single game day of the playoffs. Because right now, every college football playoff game day, FanDuel users get a profit boost waiting for them in the app. And here's what I love about it, okay? You get to use the profit boost on the bets you already feel good about. You can ride with the favorite when you think a team controls the matchup, or you can take a shot on the underdog if you feel an upset coming. And if you're feeling really confident, go all in and build a parlay around the players and moments you think will decide the game. Then you apply the profit boost and go after even bigger winnings. And when you win, FanDuel pays out instantly, which is the perfect thing for playoff football. Personally, I didn't have my best year this college football season, but thanks to these college football playoff profit boosts, I am back in the win column. And FanDuel is the best place to get into the action all playoff long. So visit FanDuel.com to get your college football playoff profit boost every game day. All right, we are back on Locked On Irish with another Friday Mailbag. We've just got a few more questions left before we wrap things up here. This next one comes from @BlakeToms28. Can you explain why Freeman ends up linked to NFL jobs every offseason? It feels like every coach in the country gets a pass when they're, quote, happy at a school, but not Marcus Freeman. Is this real interest, something he said, or is it media-driven? Well, this hasn't been in every offseason thing. Like, you never heard his name come up for any jobs after the 2023 season, and there was that one report during the 2024 playoff run that the Bears might be interested in him, but that was basically it. And by the time that last season ended for Notre Dame, Chicago had already hired Ben Johnson, who was their top candidate throughout the process. So who knows how legitimate that connection between Marcus Freeman and the Chicago Bears ever was. So this is really the first time Marcus Freeman's name has come up in a serious way for NFL jobs, and it's a two-way street. Marcus's track record at Notre Dame, his charisma, his leadership, his ability to connect with players and staff are all reasons that NFL teams would be interested in him. Also, his coaching style is one that a lot of people believe would translate well to the NFL. I agree with them. And when you have a young, up-and-coming head coach, you want them to have enough success that other teams find them desirable. So that's part of it. The NFL likes Marcus Freeman, and I think anyone can see why. And apparently, as many as 4 NFL teams, including the Giants, Titans, Steelers, and Browns, had internal discussions about Marcus Freeman, according to Diana Rossini of The Athletic. And then according to Pat Forty of Sports Illustrated, Marcus reportedly contacted 2 of those teams to inform them of his decision to stay at Notre Dame. So the interest from the NFL and Marcus Freeman is absolutely real. That part is not debatable. There are too many credible sources out there who've spoken about NFL teams' interest in Marcus Freeman. Now, as for how interested Marcus is in the NFL, that part is still up for debate. Some people believe he's very interested and could make the jump as soon as next year. But then there's other people who believe that Marcus was willing to listen to the NFL, but ultimately realized he's better suited for college football. At this point, only Marcus Freeman truly knows how interested he is in the NFL. And on the point about other great coaches being linked to job openings, I think people are just so focused on Notre Dame, among the fan base, I mean, that they don't notice when this happens elsewhere, and it happens elsewhere all the time. Dan Lanning, for example, has been very vocal about wanting to stay at Oregon, yet his name still popped up on all sorts of short lists, like the LSU job, the Michigan job, the Penn State job, and the Alabama job after Nick Saban retired. It was never a realistic possibility, but analysts and pundits still included him because he's one of the best. And the reason that Kirby Smart isn't mentioned is because Georgia is arguably the top job in college football, and it's where Kirby Smart played football. He's never going to leave that place. And plus, his coaching style does not translate to the NFL. Like, have you heard him at practice? Have you seen those videos going around Twitter and TikTok and Instagram where he's yelling at his entire team on this big megaphone and you can hear it like a mile away on the Georgia campus? That wouldn't work in the NFL. Kirby Smart is not an NFL-style head coach. He might try it out one day, but when you picture NFL head coach, like CEO of a big-time NFL franchise, you don't picture Kirby Smart. You picture someone like Marcus Freeman. Ryan Day's name was very popular in NFL circles a few years ago. That has quieted down. He has stayed committed to Ohio State, but he's been around a little bit longer. We're just sort of in the early days of the interest with the NFL and Marcus Freeman. Hell, even Nick Saban was linked to the Texas job at one point while he was at the peak of his powers at Alabama. That was a real thing. People thought that Nick Saban might leave Alabama for the Texas job because he had already won a couple national championships there. Maybe he just got bored with it and wanted to go to Texas. But I remember that rumor, and that was a big deal at the time. And then guess what? It never happened. So it happens to all great coaches. We are just blinded by our fandom, and we don't always recognize that this happens across college football a lot. That said, I think we can all agree Marcus could do more to quiet the noise, which then leads me to this next question from Drew Brennan 77. Do you find it strange that literally all we've heard from Coach Freeman is the short tweet about him coming back to Notre Dame for 2026? It would seem with all the speculation out there surrounding Marcus in the NFL, it would have made sense for Notre Dame to put together a statement with quotes from Bavacqua and Freeman. What do you think the strategy or lack of strategy is here? Or am I reading too much into this? Well, I mean, I never expected Marcus Freeman to hold a press conference about it, especially since he didn't do one last year after signing his first real long-term extension. People were asking, like, is this a long-term extension? It's really not. It's just basically adding one more year to the 6-year deal that he had before, and now he's just getting more money annually. So it's really like a raise, but they did add one more year at the end of it. So in a way, it is an extension. But that said, I'll admit, I think the way that they handled the announcement was pretty weird. Leading with, quote, 2026, ... run it back, go Irish, certainly makes it sound like he's only going to be around for one more year, even if that's not true and he plans to stay long term. It creates a problem for him because now recruits are always going to ask him if he's sticking around before they even get to campus. Opposing coaches are going to use it against him too. I've heard there was a longer statement that Freeman and his team had prepared, but they ultimately decided to scrap it, and they just went with the tweet. I'm not sure why they made that decision, and I personally don't think that was the right move. But also, you have to consider that Marcus is not someone who likes to bring a lot of attention to himself. So he probably didn't want to make a grand announcement again because he just did one last year, and then he might feel the need to repeat that every offseason. Because, look, Marcus's name is going to continue to come up in NFL job openings. He's going to have to turn them down and turn them down and turn them down until eventually they're going to back off. But as I just laid out, Marcus Freeman is a very desirable candidate. That's just the reality. So he's going to have to shoot them down over and over and over again for that to stop. So if that's the case, does he really need to do a grand announcement every single offseason? No. So I think that's why they decided to go with the tweet. I've seen some fans claim that the reason that portal players are not coming to Notre Dame is because of Freeman, and that just does not add up whatsoever. The vast majority of transfers really only expect to be around for 1, maybe 2 years. And yes, I understand that there are undergraduate transfers with multiple years of eligibility. Those guys probably plan on sticking around for 2 years. But Marcus has already said he's coming back next season. So if you're a player like Nick Marsh, for example, who probably expects to leave for the NFL after one season, why the hell would you care what Marcus Freeman does after that? That doesn't make any sense. It's one of the most bizarre explanations I've seen for the lack of portal success. And another one that's actually even weirder than that is Notre Dame's bowl opt-out. If you actually believe a transfer would turn down the chance to play at Notre Dame for a big NIL deal because the previous team didn't play in the Pop-Tart Bowl, I honestly don't know what to tell you. Players do not care about bowl games on their own teams. That's why so many players opt out every single year. And players who weren't even on the team care less. Like, I just think all of these questions and all of these fears and all of these concerns stem from the collective angst and frustration this fan base has been dealing with for over the past month. And I get it. And you know what? We're going to close it out with this question from Peter Busek, my guy. Is the sky falling? Are we cooked? No, the sky is not falling. Notre Dame is not cooked. They're still in position to make a run to the college football playoff next season. It should still be a really good season. They have a bunch of talent coming back. They have a really great coaching staff. They have a favorable schedule. Everything is still out in front of them to make some noise, make a run next season. But this is just one of those stretches where the fan base desperately needs some good news, and everyone's a little on edge waiting for it to come. The portal hasn't delivered yet. I still believe it will, and that will be huge for this fan base. And if they can put together a solid haul, it'll do wonders for all of our collective sanity. Appreciate you all for making Locked On Irish your first watch or listen of the day. And before we get started on your weekend, please take a second to subscribe to the YouTube channel or follow along wherever you get your podcast. And if you never miss an episode, the Everydayer Club is built for you. Get Locked On Irish ad-free, plus members-only Discord access and more. Head to lockedonirish.supercast.com to join the club. Enjoy the weekend, everybody. Try not to refresh the transfer portal every 5 minutes. I promise you it's going to get better soon. And I'm going to be back next week with the latest on Notre Dame's portal situation. I'll see you then.